The Vanguard cut through the stars like a blade through the dark. Commander David Drake stood at the helm, his hand steady on the control panel as the stars streaked past. His eyes were focused, but his mind raced. The Kryn Empire's surprise attack on the colony world of Tresic had shaken humanity to its core. The Kryn, known for their devastating military strategies, had shown no mercy. The Federation's call for retaliation was swift. This time, humanity would not stand by as the galaxy burned. Tresic had been a peaceful world, a scientific outpost, and a vital part of the Earth Federation's foothold in the far reaches of space. The Kryn, however, didn't care for peace. They saw the colony as a threat to their expansionist goals and destroyed it with ruthless efficiency. The Federation Council had already declared the attack an act of war, but for Drake, the line between defense and vengeance had become blurred. The Vanguard was Earth's newest and most advanced starship, a beacon of human ingenuity. It was fast, heavily armed, and equipped with experimental technology designed to counter the overwhelming strength of the Kryn. But it was one ship, and the Kryn had an entire armada. Drake had faced impossible odds before, but this time felt different. The weight of the mission was heavier than ever. His crew, a diverse group of skilled men and women from all walks of life, had trained for this moment. They were ready. But readiness alone wouldn't be enough to face an enemy as formidable as the Kryn. Drake knew it would take more than strategy. It would take something else, something uniquely human. The comms beeped, pulling Drake from his thoughts. "Commander, we've received a transmission from Federation Command," said Lieutenant Mia Chen, his trusted communications officer. "They've located a Kryn fleet on the move. They're headed for a nearby system, and it looks like they plan to strike another colony." Drake leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What's the fleet's composition?" "2 battleships and several destroyers," Maya replied. "It's a smaller fleet, but they'll overwhelm the colony if we don't act fast." The decision was clear. Drake turned to his first officer, Lieutenant James Hall. "Prepare the crew for battle. We'll intercept them before they can launch their assault. All hands, report to stations." As the Vanguard shifted course, Drake's mind raced. He had no illusions about the battle ahead. The Kryn didn't fight fair. They used overwhelming numbers and superior technology to crush their enemies. But humanity had one advantage the Kryn had yet to fully understand: adaptability. Drake's voice was calm but firm as he addressed the crew over the intercom. "This won't be an easy fight, but remember, we're not just fighting for Tresic or for the Federation. We're fighting for every person in the galaxy who wants to live without fear. We are humanity's last hope." He could feel the determination in the air, a charge that electrified the crew. Each one knew the risks, but they had signed up for this fight. The enemy was fierce, but they had something the Kryn didn't: the will to fight for something greater than themselves. As the Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace and into the cold, deadly silence of the enemy system, Drake's eyes remained fixed on the monitor. The fleet was already there, just beyond the orbit of a gas giant. It was time. "Let's show them what humans are capable of," Drake muttered to himself, the words barely a whisper in the hum of the ship's systems. The Vanguard moved into position, ready for the clash that would set the course for the future of humanity. The Vanguard moved swiftly through the vastness of space, its engines humming with precision. Drake stood at the command bridge, his eyes scanning the view ahead. The Kryn fleet was on the horizon, a vast assembly of warships that dwarfed the Vanguard in both size and firepower. But Drake wasn't concerned with their numbers. He knew his crew, and he trusted their ingenuity. Lieutenant Chen's voice broke the tense silence. "Enemy fleet has detected us, Commander. They're preparing to engage." Drake nodded. He had expected this. "Prepare the forward plasma cannons. We'll make our first strike before they can bring their full firepower to bear." He turned to Hall, his first officer, who had a determined look on his face. "We'll need to be fast and precise," Drake said. "One wrong move and we'll be outgunned. Get me a tactical readout of their fleet." Hall quickly punched in a series of commands, bringing up a holographic display of the Kryn ships. The enemy fleet was made up of 2 massive battleships, heavily armored and equipped with energy shields capable of deflecting most conventional weapons. The remaining ships were destroyers, fast and maneuverable, but less formidable in direct confrontation. "Target the lead battleship's reactor," Drake ordered. "If we can hit them there, it'll disrupt their entire formation. Then we take out the destroyers." The crew worked seamlessly, each person falling into their role without hesitation. The Vanguard glided through space with terrifying grace, and as it approached the enemy, Drake felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was the moment. "Engaging," Hall called out. The Vanguard unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, the plasma cannons lighting up the dark void. The first shots hit the lead battleship squarely in the forward shields. The Kryn ship retaliated with a volley of missiles and energy beams, but the Vanguard was already darting out of the way, using the agility of its design to avoid the worst of the assault. The battle was chaotic. The Kryn were relentless, their advanced tactics forcing the Vanguard into evasive maneuvers. But the Vanguard's crew was no less determined. In the heart of the battle, Drake's mind raced through the options, looking for the one opening that could turn the tide. "Bring us in close to the lead battleship," Drake ordered. "Activate the EMP pulse. We need to disrupt their shields long enough to get a clear shot at their reactor." "EMP pulse ready," Hall replied. "But it's a one-time shot. If we miss, we'll be exposed." Drake knew the risks, but there was no other choice. Do it. With a shudder, the Vanguard unleashed the electromagnetic pulse. For a moment, everything went silent as the shields of the Kryn battleship flickered and faltered. This was the opening Drake had been waiting for. The Vanguard surged forward, its weapons systems fully charged. "Fire," Drake commanded. The blast from the Vanguard's main cannon hit the enemy battleship directly at its weak point, the reactor core. The resulting explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through space and tearing the ship apart. The lead battleship's destruction sent a ripple of panic through the Kryn fleet, but their retaliation was immediate. The remaining destroyers swarmed the Vanguard, launching a barrage of missiles and energy beams. "We're not out of the woods yet," Hall said, his voice tense. But Drake didn't flinch. The crew had done the impossible once again. The Vanguard was severely damaged, but it was still in the fight. With one battleship down, the remaining destroyers were scattered and disorganized. The next phase of the plan was clear: press the attack. "Let's finish this," Drake muttered, his eyes locking onto the remaining enemies. The crew was ready, their morale soaring from the success of their first strike. They were no longer the underdogs. They had proven they could stand against the might of the Kryn. The Vanguard charged forward again, this time with more confidence, more power. The tide had begun to turn. The Kryn fleet, now in disarray, regrouped quickly after the destruction of their lead battleship. The Vanguard had created a hole in their formation, but it was a small victory in a war that was far from over. Commander Drake's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display, eyes scanning the enemy's movements. Despite their setbacks, the Kryn were still a formidable force, and their counterattack was inevitable. Drake turned to his first officer, Lieutenant Hall. "Prepare for a final assault. We'll strike at the heart of their command." Hall nodded. "There's a massive station in orbit around their homeworld. It's the nerve center of the entire Kryn fleet. If we disable it, the rest of their forces will be vulnerable." Drake's mind churned. The Kryn Empire was vast, its power unchallenged for centuries. But if they could take out the station, they might have a chance to disrupt their control once and for all. The problem was the station's defenses. It was heavily shielded, surrounded by the Empire's last remaining battleships, and there was no guarantee they could break through. "We don't have the luxury of time," Drake said. "We go in fast and hit them hard." The Vanguard hurtled through the void, its engines roaring as it approached the Kryn homeworld. The station loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of metal and energy that seemed to pulse with malevolent power. It was surrounded by a fleet of destroyers, their weapons primed and ready to defend their last stronghold. As they neared the station, Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, the station's shields are too powerful to breach with our current weapons. We'll need to get closer to disable their outer defenses." Drake looked out across the battlefield. The remaining destroyers were closing in, but they would have to act quickly to avoid being overwhelmed. "All hands, brace for impact. Helm, prepare evasive maneuvers. We're going in." With a sudden burst of speed, the Vanguard shot forward, weaving between the incoming fire of the Kryn destroyers. The ship shook under the barrage, but its advanced shielding held firm. Drake's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every decision counted now. One misstep could cost them everything. "Prepare the EMP device," Drake ordered. "We need to disable the station's outer defenses, and we don't have time to be subtle." Hall's voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency. "EMP ready, Commander. We're in range." "Fire," Drake commanded. The Vanguard unleashed the EMP pulse, sending a wave of electromagnetic energy toward the station's outer shields. The shields flickered, then dropped entirely. The station's defenses were momentarily disabled, but it wouldn't last long. The Kryn would quickly regroup and retaliate. "Now's our chance," Drake said, his voice cold and determined. "Target their power core." With the station's shields down, the Vanguard fired everything it had. The energy beams slammed into the heart of the station, igniting a chain reaction. The station's massive power core trembled, but it held for a moment longer, refusing to give in to the assault. Drake's knuckles tightened around the armrest as he watched the countdown on his display. This was their one shot. "We need to finish this before they can recover," he said through gritted teeth. The Vanguard's weapons fired again, and this time the core couldn't take it. An explosion rippled through the station, sending shockwaves that reverberated across the battlefield. The Kryn fleet scrambled, but the damage was done. Without their command center, their ships were in disarray. "We've done it," Hall said, his voice almost in disbelief. "Their fleet is falling apart." The Vanguard continued to press the advantage, cutting down the remaining destroyers one by one. The tide had shifted. The Kryn Empire, once unshakable, was crumbling before humanity's relentless drive. Drake allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but he knew the war wasn't over yet. This was a victory, but it was only a step. The real battle would come when they confronted the heart of the Kryn Empire itself. "Hold course," Drake ordered. "We've made a hole in their defenses, but there's more to be done. We finish this now." The crew of the Vanguard was ready. They had taken the first step toward toppling an empire. And now, with the power of unity and ingenuity behind them, they were prepared to take the final one. The Vanguard drifted slowly through the wreckage of the Kryn fleet, the remains of their ships scattered across space like broken bones. The explosion of the Kryn station had been a massive blow to their command structure, and the remnants of their forces were in disarray. Yet, as Commander Drake stood at the helm, he knew the battle was far from over. The Kryn were a tenacious enemy, and no victory would come without a cost. The ship was heavily damaged. Shielding systems were offline, propulsion was sluggish, and several of the crew were tending to injuries sustained during the brutal assault. Despite this, there was a sense of cautious optimism aboard the Vanguard as it limped toward the nearby Federation supply base for repairs. "Commander," Lieutenant Hall's voice cut through the quiet of the command center. "We've sustained significant damage, but we're still operational. We can make it to the base, but we need to make repairs as soon as possible." Drake nodded grimly. "I'm aware, Lieutenant, but we can't afford to rest too long. The Kryn will retaliate, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything they have left." "We can't stop now," Hall added, his tone resolute. "We've already hit them hard. If we regroup, we might be able to finish the job." Drake understood the gravity of the situation. The Kryn's resolve was unmatched, and the Federation was still too weak to take them on without a fully operational fleet. Time was a luxury they didn't have. But there was something more pressing on his mind, something that went beyond the tactical concerns. As the Vanguard neared the supply base, Drake called for a crew meeting in the briefing room. He needed to get their perspective before making the next move. The Vanguard had taken a beating, but morale was high. Humanity had faced down an empire and walked away victorious, but at what cost? The crew gathered around the table, the weight of their shared experiences palpable in the air. Drake addressed them directly. I know many of you are eager to finish this fight, to strike at the heart of the Kryn and end this once and for all. And we can do it, but we have to be prepared for the cost. We've lost good people already, and there's no telling what we'll face in the next phase of this war. The room fell silent, each person reflecting on the sacrifices made thus far. Sergeant Vargas, a veteran of several battles, was the first to speak. Commander, I've fought through worse, but we can't deny the toll this is taking on us. We're still too outnumbered, and there are no guarantees that we'll have enough time to rest and repair before the next wave hits. Another voice spoke up from across the table. It was Mia Chen, the ship's communications officer. We've already struck a major blow. If we don't press on, we risk losing the momentum we've gained. The Kryn are already organizing for a counterattack. We can't sit back and let them recover. Drake's mind raced as he considered their words. He had already seen the sacrifices of this war, the heavy price that victory demanded. The crew was weary. The Federation was not ready for a full-scale offensive. But as he looked at their faces, their determination to continue the fight, he realized they had already made their decision. The Vanguard had come this far, and they couldn't stop now. We push forward, Drake said, his voice firm. We'll resupply, make the necessary repairs, but we press on. The Kryn are weakened, and they won't stay that way forever. We've seen what humanity can do, and now it's time to finish the job. The crew nodded, their resolve solidifying. They knew the risks, but they had come too far to turn back. This was not just a battle for the Federation. It was a fight for the freedom of the galaxy. And they would not stop until it was won. As the Vanguard docked at the Federation supply base, repairs began immediately. Yet, even as the crew worked, the shadow of what lay ahead loomed over them. The upcoming battle would be the greatest test of their strength, unity, and resolve, and no one knew if they would all make it out alive. But they had come this far, and they would fight, no matter the cost. The time for resting was over. The war was still far from won, and humanity's greatest challenge awaited them. The repairs to the Vanguard had taken longer than expected. Despite the Federation's best efforts, the ship was still showing signs of strain, and some systems were far from operational. But there was no time to waste. The Kryn were regrouping, and the window for victory was shrinking with each passing hour. Commander Drake stood at the command bridge, watching the stars stretch past the viewports. The crew was ready, their spirits high despite the lingering fatigue. Every moment of rest had given them the strength to press on. They had done the impossible once, but now they faced the ultimate test. The heart of the Kryn Empire awaited them, and it was said to be fortified by an impenetrable force, a fortress that could withstand anything. Commander, Lieutenant Hall spoke up, breaking the silence. The repairs are complete enough to get us back into the fight. We're fully operational, but the Kryn won't wait for us to catch our breath. Drake turned to his first officer, his gaze unwavering. I know. The question now is, where do we strike? Their main fleet is still somewhere out there, but their command structure is broken. We need to find their next move, or they'll regroup and hit us with everything they've got. Mia Chen, the communications officer, stood at her station, her fingers flying across the console. I've been monitoring their communications. They're scrambling, trying to re-establish contact with other fleets in the region. I believe they're attempting to rally their remaining forces, but there's one signal that stands out. a large convoy of battleships heading toward a heavily fortified world. It's their capital, Surat. It's likely where their leadership has retreated. Drake's eyes narrowed. Surat was the heart of the Kryn Empire, a world surrounded by defensive stations and ships. It was the most heavily guarded system in the galaxy. If the Vanguard attacked there, it would be suicide. Or so they had always believed. But now, it was their only choice. "We can't let them regroup," Drake said firmly. "If we take Surat, we cripple the Kryn once and for all. We'll be risking everything, but we have no other option." "We know the risks, Commander," Hall said. "But you're right. The Kryn can't be allowed to recover. If we take their capital, we end this war. We've come this far. We can't back down now." The Vanguard's crew was already preparing for the mission. The tension on board was palpable, each crew member focused on their task. They were about to face the most dangerous battle of their lives, but there was no turning back. The choice was clear. The galaxy's future would be determined in the heart of the Kryn Empire. As the Vanguard made the jump into hyperspace, Drake stood at the helm, looking at the faces of his crew. They were all in this together. In a way, this was their final moment of peace, the calm before the storm. Once they arrived in the Surat system, they would be facing the full might of the Kryn. The Federation's remaining forces had already been decimated. It was just them. A single ship, but a symbol of human determination. Drake took a deep breath, his mind already running through every possible strategy. Time was not on their side. The Vanguard had to hit the Kryn hard and fast before they could muster enough strength to retaliate. The ship's engines hummed as they neared the edge of the Surat system. He could feel the weight of the mission in his bones, but there was no room for doubt. If they faltered now, the entire galaxy would pay the price. "Prepare for arrival," Drake ordered. "This is it. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. We take Surat, or we die trying." The crew moved swiftly to their positions. They knew the risks, and they knew what was at stake. The battle ahead would be their greatest challenge, but they were ready. This time, they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of the galaxy. As the stars began to blur into the familiar streaks of hyperspace travel, Drake couldn't help but feel a surge of resolve. He had led his crew through impossible odds before, and now they were about to face the ultimate test. This was humanity's moment to stand tall, to prove that even against the most overwhelming odds, they could rise. And they would rise together. The Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace with a jolt, the engines groaning as they fought to steady the ship. Ahead, the Surat system stretched out before them like a final battleground. The capital of the Kryn Empire loomed large, a world surrounded by vast fleets of warships, defensive platforms, and fortified space stations. The atmosphere was tense, even in the cold silence of space. Commander Drake knew this would be the most dangerous moment of their entire mission. The ship's sensors flared to life, displaying the vast Kryn fleet arrayed around Surat. A dozen battleships, accompanied by countless destroyers and cruisers, formed an impenetrable wall of steel. It was the last bastion of the Kryn's might, and they weren't going to give it up easily. But the Vanguard had come this far. This was their final strike, and there was no turning back. "Commander, the enemy fleet has already detected us," Hall reported, his voice cool but edged with urgency. "They're locking onto our position. We're going to be outgunned if we stay in one place." Drake looked at the screen, calculating their chances. The Vanguard was outnumbered, and the defenses around Surat were far superior to anything they'd faced before. But he had one advantage that the Kryn didn't. He had the will of his crew, and their unwavering determination. "Deploy the flares," Drake ordered. "We'll use them to throw off their targeting systems. We need to close the distance quickly, or we'll never make it to the surface." "Flares deployed," Chen confirmed, activating the ship's countermeasures. The Vanguard's engines flared as the ship surged forward, leaving a trail of false readings behind them. The Kryn fleet fired, but their shots missed wide as they were fooled by the decoys. The Vanguard's engines roared as they plunged deeper into the system, weaving through the incoming barrage. The ship groaned as it absorbed hits, but its reinforced hull held. With every passing moment, they grew closer to the planet, closer to the heart of the Kryn Empire. "We're almost there," Hall said, his eyes glued to the tactical display. "The outer defenses are weakening, but we're not out of the woods yet. Keep pushing forward," Drake said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We can't stop now." The Vanguard streaked past the Kryn's outermost defensive stations, cutting a path through the wreckage of destroyed ships. The enemy was disorganized, their forces scattered and scrambling to reorganize in the face of the unexpected attack. But the remaining Kryn forces fought back with a savage intensity that showed just how far they would go to protect their last stronghold. "Brace for impact," Hall shouted as a barrage of fire erupted from a nearby destroyer, slamming into the Vanguard's shields. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring as sparks flew from several consoles. Crew members scrambled to restore systems, but despite the damage, they kept pushing forward. "Damage report," Drake barked. "Shields at 30%, came the response from Lieutenant Chen. "Hull integrity is holding. We're still operational, but just barely." "We'll make it," Drake said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Keep pushing." With the Kryn fleet closing in from behind, and the defenses around Surat growing ever more formidable, Drake knew they had to make a move. He couldn't allow them the time to recover. He needed to get to the planet's surface and strike at the heart of the Kryn leadership. The enemy fleet might be strong, but they were spread thin. This was their chance to finish it. "Prepare the boarding teams," Drake ordered, his mind already on the next phase. "We'll break through their final defenses and take the fight to the ground. Hall, take control of the forward assault. We're going to disable their planet-side command center." "Aye, Commander," Hall replied. His expression was grim, but there was no hesitation in his voice. The Vanguard surged toward Surat's atmosphere, the planet's surface now visible in the distance. There was no turning back. They had fought through everything to get here, and now, with their shields on the verge of failure, they were going to face the Kryn where they lived. It was the final assault, the one that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "On my mark," Drake said, his voice carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "All systems go." The ship accelerated once more, blasting through the remnants of the Kryn defenses as they neared the surface. The fight was almost over. And though the final battle had yet to begin, there was no doubt in Drake's mind. Humanity would not be defeated. This was their moment to take the throne plus. The Vanguard tore through the atmosphere of Surat, the massive planet's surface rushing up to meet them. The ship's hull groaned under the strain as they cut through layers of thick clouds and debris from the ongoing battle. The Kryn defenses on the planet were strong, but not strong enough to stop them now. With each passing second, the crew grew closer to their final objective, the heart of the Kryn Empire. Drake stood at the command console, eyes narrowed as the planet loomed ahead. The Vanguard was battered, its shields barely holding, but its engines still thrummed with life. He could feel the pressure building. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. "Commander," Hall's voice broke through the tension. "We're on final approach. Their planetary defense turrets are locked on to our position. It won't be long before they fire." "Hold steady," Drake said, his voice firm. "We're almost through. Once we hit the ground, we move fast. No hesitation. This is our chance." The Vanguard shuddered as it hit the upper layers of the atmosphere, but the ship held firm. Drake felt a small jolt as they broke through the final layer of cloud cover, revealing the sprawling cityscape of Surat below. Towering spires and gleaming structures dotted the surface, but amidst the beauty of the city, the devastation of war was evident. Explosions ripped through buildings, smoke billowed into the sky, and fire rained down on the streets. The Kryn were fighting to the last. "Target the command center," Drake ordered. "We disable their leadership, and the rest will fall." The Vanguard's weapons systems locked onto their target, an enormous, heavily fortified citadel at the center of the city. From the air, it looked impenetrable, a fortress surrounded by anti-air defenses and guarded by elite Kryn soldiers. But the Vanguard had no choice. They had to strike now. Firing weapons, Lieutenant Chen confirmed, her hands flying over the controls. The ship's guns roared to life, sending pulses of energy toward the citadel. The blast hit its outer defenses, causing a cascade of explosions as shields flared and crumpled under the force of the attack. The citadel's defenses were formidable, but the Vanguard's firepower had made a dent. "Shields are dropping," Hall reported. "They're retaliating. We've got incoming fire from their ground turrets." Drake's hand gripped the edge of the console as the ship shuddered once more, this time from direct hits. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and warning lights flashed in every corner of the bridge. They were on the brink of being overwhelmed. "Prepare for boarding," Drake commanded. "We'll send a team to take the citadel. Hall, you're in charge of the ground assault. I'll lead the charge to their leadership." "Aye, Commander," Hall said without hesitation. His face was set with grim determination. The Vanguard descended rapidly, its wings cutting through the atmosphere as it neared the citadel. The ground forces below were scrambling to prepare for the attack, but there was no time to waste. Drake's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This was humanity's final push, their last chance to rid the galaxy of the Kryn's reign of terror. The ship's landing gear hit the ground with a heavy thud, sending a shockwave through the city as the Vanguard came to a sudden stop. The crew wasted no time. Drake, Hall, and a select team of soldiers geared up and prepared to disembark. The landing bay doors opened with a hiss, and the battle raged outside. Kryn soldiers, heavily armored and armed with advanced weaponry, stormed toward the ship. "We push forward," Drake shouted. "No stopping until we reach the command center. Move out." The team moved quickly, cutting down the Kryn soldiers who attempted to block their path. The gunfire echoed through the streets of Surat as they fought their way to the citadel. There was no turning back now. Every step took them closer to the heart of the Kryn Empire, where their fate, and the fate of the galaxy, would be decided. Drake's breath came in heavy bursts as he charged through the chaos, leading the charge toward the citadel's entrance. Explosions rocked the city around them, but the team pushed on, their determination unwavering. Finally, they'd reached the citadel's massive gates, reinforced by the last remnants of the Kryn's military strength. The gates groaned as they began to give way under the weight of their assault. This was it. The leadership of the Kryn Empire lay just beyond those gates. The end of the war, and the beginning of a new era, was within reach. Drake stood at the threshold of the citadel, the door slowly grinding open. This would be the final battle, and humanity would emerge victorious. The galaxy had been waiting for this moment for centuries, and now it was theirs for the taking. The gates of the citadel finally gave way with a tremendous groan, crumbling as the team rushed through. The moment of truth had arrived. Commander Drake led the charge, his footsteps echoing in the expansive halls as they entered the heart of the Kryn Empire. The walls were adorned with banners and relics of the Kryn's long, brutal reign. The air was thick with the weight of the Empire's arrogance. But Drake's focus was singular. His mission was clear. The Kryn leadership had to fall. Their empire's strength had been built on oppression, and now it was time to break it. "Push forward," Drake barked. His voice was steady, but the urgency was unmistakable. "We can't let them regroup." The team moved quickly, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the citadel. Every corner they turned, they met fierce resistance. Kryn soldiers, their armor shining with the insignia of the ruling class, appeared in waves, but the humans were relentless. Despite their battered state, the Vanguard crew fought with the fury of a people who had lost too much to turn back. A loud explosion rocked the citadel as one of the team's explosives blasted through a wall, creating a new opening. "We're almost there," Hall shouted over the din of the battle, leading the way toward the central command chamber. As they entered the final stretch, the sound of distant voices echoed through the grand hall. Drake's heart raced. He knew that the heart of the Kryn Empire lay just beyond. The chamber's heavy doors were guarded by elite soldiers, the last line of defense before they could take down the leadership. Drake motioned to his team. "Take them down. We move in fast." The battle was swift and brutal. The Kryn soldiers fought with every ounce of their strength, but it was clear that their will had already begun to break. One by one, they fell, their advanced weapons no match for the determination of Drake and his crew. With a final push, they breached the doors to the inner sanctum of the leadership. Inside, the room was vast, with a massive throne at the far end. Atop it sat the High Commander of the Kryn Empire, a figure draped in dark robes, their face obscured by a helmet that gleamed with an air of superiority. To their side stood a group of advisors, a last-ditch attempt to maintain control. Drake stepped forward, his weapon drawn but his eyes locked on the throne. "It's over," he said. His voice was calm, but filled with finality. "Your reign ends today." The High Commander stood, removing their helmets slowly, revealing the face of someone Drake had never expected. A woman, older than most of the Kryn leaders he had encountered, with eyes that burned with defiance. She was the embodiment of the Empire's arrogance, and yet there was a flicker of something else in her gaze. Fear. "You think you've won, human." The High Commander spat, her voice low but tinged with bitterness. "You've only brought destruction. The Kryn are eternal. You will never see peace." Drake stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. "Your empire is built on lies and oppression, and it ends now." He raised his weapon, pointing it squarely at her. "This galaxy belongs to the people, not to tyrants." A moment of silence hung in the air as the tension reached its peak. Then, without hesitation, Drake pulled the trigger. The blast was swift and final. The High Commander crumpled to the ground, her body hitting the cold stone floor with a sickening thud. Her advisors stood in shock, realizing in an instant that their empire had crumbled in the blink of an eye. The room fell silent. Drake's chest rose and fell as he surveyed the room. The weight of the moment hung heavy. The leader of the Kryn Empire was dead, and with it, the heart of their tyranny had been severed. But even as the battle ended, Drake knew there was still much work to be done. The Vanguard had brought them to this point, but it would take more than one strike to bring peace to the galaxy. Still, with the fall of the Kryn leadership, the rest of their forces would scatter. Their empire would no longer be a unified threat. Drake turned to his crew. "We've won, but the galaxy is still rebuilding. We have much work ahead of us." The crew nodded, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. They had fought a long and hard war, and now they had secured a future free from the shackles of the Kryn Empire. As the Vanguard prepared to leave Surat, Drake couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. They had done it. They had crushed the throne, and the galaxy would never be the same. The legacy of the Kryn was no more, replaced by the hope of a new era. A new age where humanity could take its place as the guardians of peace, not just in their corner of the galaxy, but across the stars. And the Vanguard would lead them into that future, a symbol of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit.